The Galactic Interspecies Military Academy at Apex Primus did not deal in mistakes, only historical administrative truths. According to the High Council's Xenological Bureau Registry, entry 9402 Delta, the planet known locally as Earth was classified as a Class II soft-tech avian cradle standard world. The entry had been written 3 centuries prior by an automated scout probe that had briefly dipped into Earth's upper atmosphere, scanned a solitary albatross gliding over the Pacific, recorded the low density of avian skeletal structures, and concluded that the planet's primary biosphere consisted of fragile, hollow-boned creatures floating lazily through thin, gentle air currents. Nobody had bothered to update the file. Humans were late arrivals to the interstellar community, possessing no vast territorial empires, no plasma scythe leviathans, and no terrifying carapace armor. When Cadet Maya Cruz walked into the grand atrium of the Vanguard Hall, she carried a worn canvas duffel bag over one shoulder and wore standard-issue Navy fatigue trousers paired with a black tank top. To the alien eyes watching from the tiered galleries above, she looked like a walking structural failure. "Look at it," hissed Vaughn, an 8-foot-tall Apex-class Krathak, whose chitinous exoskeleton gleamed like oiled obsidian. He shifted 4 muscular upper arms, the joint plates grinding with the sound of crushed gravel. No outer carapace, no dorsal venom spines, not even a secondary pulmonary sac. If I dropped a heavy wrench on its cranium, it would likely fold into a paste. Beside him, Instructor Thrax adjusted his biomonocle. Thrax was a Krellian, a species boasting a pristine pedigree of planetary conquerors. His skin was translucent blue, revealing a hyper-efficient network of pressurized vascular tubes, and his posture radiated the cold, unyielding superiority of a species that had perfected biomechanical engineering before Earth had invented the wheel. "The hegemony values diversity of target practice, Cadet Vaughn," Thrax said, his vocal synthesizer filtering his raspy clicking into refined high galactic. "The Council mandated the inclusion of these Earthlings to satisfy the charity quotas of the Outer Rim Uplift Initiative. She will be gone by the 3rd rotation cycle. The environment modules will break her before the week ends." Maya stopped at the central registration terminal. She felt the heavy gaze of 300 high-gravity, hyper-dense, apex predator species boring into her back. She didn't turn around. Instead, she took a long, slow breath, rolling her shoulders to loosen her traps. The air in the Academy atrium was thin, dry, and smelled faintly of artificial ozone and expensive cleaning solvents. To the Krathak, the standard 0.45 g gravity and 14% oxygen mix was considered bracing and vigorous. To Maya, who had spent 18 years running cross-country up the rocky slopes of the Colorado Rockies at 1.1 g, it felt like floating inside a warm, empty balloon. "Cadet Cruz." Instructor Thrax called out, his boots clicking rhythmically against the polished marble floor as he descended the grand staircase. "You are late for bioenvironmental baseline orientation. Flight delay from the orbital depot, sir," Maya said, offering a crisp, flat salute. Atmospheric shuttle had to throttle down. Apparently, a minor crosswind was unsettling the diplomatic corps. Vaughn let out a sharp, clicking bark of laughter, the Krathak equivalent of a sneer. Crosswinds. A breeze of 12 knots nearly grounded her vessel. Delightful. Thrax ignored Vaughn's outburst, though his compound eyes flickered with quiet amusement. "Your gear is non-standard, Cadet. Why are you wearing lead-lined kinetic restraint bands on your ankles and wrists?" Maya looked down at the dull gray bands wrapped snugly around her limbs. "Oh, these. They're just calibration weights, sir. Keeps my muscle density from degrading in your base setting. Thrax's biomonocle hummed as it scanned the metal strips. The system registered them as dense industrial slag blocks, each weighing roughly 40 pounds. A performance affectation, Thrax declared coolly. Remove them. We do not tolerate theatrical posturing in the Vanguard division. You will need every microjoule of your pathetic metabolic reserve simply to survive today's practical assessment. Maya shrugged, bending down to unbuckle the heavy straps. They hit the marble floor with a heavy, concussive THE that vibrated through the floorboards and set off a brief seismic tick on the hall's structural sensors. Vaughn blinked, his mandibular plates twitching. Thrax narrowed his eyes, though his tone remained dry and dismissive. "To the environmental chamber, cadets," Thrax commanded. "Today, we test the absolute limits of mortal endurance." Environmental Simulation Chamber 4 was a massive dome constructed from triple reinforced diamond polycarbonate walls. Inside, the chamber could replicate every known ecological nightmare in the hegemony, from the scorching liquid lead oceans of Serta 9 to the crushing subterranean trenches of Ouroboros. The 30 cadets of the Vanguard Alpha cohort filed into the central staging grid. They were the elite of their respective worlds, massive quadrupedal gorgons with thick bone-plated ribs, serpentine slith who survived via internal hydraulic pressure bladders, and chitinous Krathak war masters built for trench combat. And Maya, 5'6", broad-shouldered, wearing short-cropped dark hair and a neutral expression that bordered on total boredom. Thrax stood at the control console outside the reinforced observation glass, his slender fingers hovering over the environmental control dials. "Cadets," Thrax's voice echoed through the chamber's high-output intercom. "The hegemony military doctrine is simple: adapt or perish. What you see before you is the standard galactic comfort zone. Over the next hour, I will incrementally raise the ambient gravity and atmospheric pressure to simulate the horrific conditions of a high-hazard zone." He turned a primary dial. A deep, thrumming hum vibrated through the floorboards as the chamber's grav plates spun up. Around the room, several cadets shifted their stances. A pair of avian-derived Skrull cadets rustled their feathers nervously, their hollow bones creaking under the slight increase to 0.65 gravities and 1.1 atmospheres of pressure. Vaughn scoffed, planting his 4 lower legs firmly on the steel deck plates. "Pathetic. I barely feel a tremor." He glanced down at Maya, who was stretching her calves against a structural pillar. "How are your frail, bird-like limbs holding up, Earthling? Are you ready to cry for the medics?" Maya didn't look up from her calf stretch. "Air's a bit thin, honestly. Feels like Denver in late August. Arrogant ape," Vaughn muttered. Outside the glass, Thrax smiled a thin, cruel smile. He reached for the primary override lever. "Let us see how long that bravado lasts when the air turns to liquid lead." He cranked the dial sharply to the right, driving the room up to 1.2 gravities and 2.5 atmospheres. The atmospheric pumps roared. A visible mist of compressed air bloomed near the ceiling vents as the pressure crashed downward like an invisible hydraulic press. Inside the dome, the reaction was immediate. One of the Skrull cadets gave a wet, wheezing gasp, his legs buckling beneath him as his lightweight, skeletal structure groaned under the burden. He collapsed to his knees, clawing frantically at his neck as his lungs struggled to push against the heavy wall of dense gas. "Cadet Vane, drop out!" Thrax announced over the comms. tapping a command that deployed an automated medical gurney to drag the fallen Skrull through an airlock. "The rest of you, hold your formations." The serpentine slith was squirming uncomfortably, its internal hydraulic fluids hissing loudly as safety valves along its ribs vented pressure to prevent its skin from bursting. Even Vaughn had ceased his smug smirking. His forelegs were flared wide, his chitinous joints locked in a rigid arch to support his 800-pound frame. "This is real weight," Vaughn grunted, his mandatory breathing vents puffing hot white steam into the heavy air. He looked over at Maya. She had stopped stretching. She was standing in the middle of the room, hands on her hips, taking deep, slow, deliberate breaths. Her chest expanded fully, drawing in massive gulps of the oxygen mixture. To her hyper-efficient human cardiovascular system, evolved over millions of years on a high-gravity, oxygen-rich death rock, this wasn't a nightmare environment. It was a cold glass of ice water. Her heart rate, monitored on the public telemetry screen above the observation deck, had actually dropped from 72 beats per minute to 58. "Instructor," Maya called out, raising a hand. Her voice wasn't a wheeze or a gasp. It was a loud, crisp bellow that cut effortlessly through the heavy atmospheric haze. "Is the ventilation system stuck?" Thrax froze at the console. He stared at her telemetry readouts in disbelief. Core body temperature, normal. Skeletal stress, 0. Lactic acid accumulation, negligible. "Stuck?" Thrax barked into the microphone. "Cadet crews, you are currently experiencing the surface gravity of a Class IV heavy frontier world. Your organs should be compressing." "It feels like I'm wearing a heavy sweater," Maya replied, rolling her shoulders. "Can we crank it up? I'm starting to get cold." A murmur of disbelief and mounting panic ran through the remaining alien cadets. She's bluffing," Vaughn grunted, his chitin creaking dangerously as a hairline crack formed along his left shoulder plate. "She's using cybernetics." "No cybernetics detected, Cadet Vaughn," the chamber's AI chimed over the speakers. "Cadet Cruz's physiological response indicates optimal cellular oxygenation." Thrax's face flushed a deep, furious shade of violet. His professional pride as a high-gravity tactical master was being utterly dismantled by a creature the council file listed as a soft-tech featherweight. "You want real gravity, Earthling," Thrax snarled, gripping the emergency calibration dial, a control reserved strictly for simulated re-entry training of heavy-armored mech units. "Let us see how your soft, fleshy body handles maximum tactical load." He slammed the lever to the physical stop limit, spiking the environment to 2.8 gravities, 5.0 atmospheres, and 35% oxygen. A sound like a tearing freight train blasted through the chamber as hypercompressed air was forced into the dome. The gravity field engaged with such violent force that 3 Gorgon cadets were instantly flattened against the deck, their heavy bone plates locking up as they activated their emergency distress beacons. Vaughn dropped to 6 points of contact, his main mandibles dragging against the steel flooring, his eyes bulging as his internal fluid pressure reached critical limits. "Stop! Thrax! Stop!" he gasped, unable to lift his head. The air in the room was now so thick it looked like pale blue water, swirling with dense currents of pressurized oxygen and nitrogen. In the center of this crushing hyperbaric EBS, Maya stood straight up. She closed her eyes for a brief second, taking a long, deep inhale. The massive blast of 35% oxygen flooded her lungs, hitting her bloodstream like a double shot of pure adrenaline. Her cheeks flushed with color. Her pupils dilated slightly. She took a step forward. Her boot came down with a heavy, deliberate clang. But her stride was smooth, effortless, and perfectly balanced. While the rest of the room was being crushed into biological soup, Maya felt like she had just stepped off a mountain summit into a high-tech spa. She walked over to the corner storage rack where the heavy physical conditioning gear was kept. The gear consisted of high-density tungsten vest plates designed to challenge heavy armored mechanized troops. She grabbed a 100-pound vest plate with one hand, flipped it into the air, caught it cleanly by the handles, and slid it over her head. Then she picked up two 50-pound hand kettlebells. Vaughn watched through blurred, bloodshot eyes as the soft-tech human walked back to the center of the room, wearing 200 pounds of extra metal under nearly 3 gravities of force, doing smooth, deep lunges. She stopped right in front of Vaughn's pinned form, looked up at the observation glass, and flashed a bright, white-toothed smirk. "Hey, Professor!" she yelled, her voice reverberating through the dense air like a thunderclap. "Is this machine running on energy saver mode? I think your grav plates are slipping." On the observation deck, Thrax was sweating profusely. He lunged for the diagnostic panel to force a manual shutdown before he killed half the Vanguard Alpha cohort. But as his fingers hit the keys, the main terminal locked up. A bright crimson strobe lit up the control room, accompanied by an ear-splitting klaxon that echoed across the entire academic sector. The automated scanner beam, a deep sapphire laser, swept down from the chamber ceiling, passing over Maya from head to toe. The central computer's voice, usually a calm and pleasant synthetic tone, glitched violently before switching to a deep, authoritative warning protocol: scan complete. Trekit baseline biology classified. Native environment: Earth, Sol 3, 10G, galactic, standard heavy. Atmospheric composition, hyperoxic nitrogen-oxygen blend with toxic trace heavy metals. Biological threat rating. Class X, death with ape physical characteristics. High-density calcium phosphate, skeletal constructure. Hyperpressurized, double-pump cardiac system. Extreme muscular recruitment efficiency, metabolic endurance threshold, critical high. Warding to instructor. Ambient simulation engines are currently beneath subjects' standard comfort zone. Increasing gravity further risks structural failure of the building, not the cadet. Manually overriding safety limits. Shutting down simulation. The heavy atmospheric valves hissed loudly as the chamber automatically vented the crushing pressure, restoring the room to standard galactic baseline. The sudden drop in gravity caused Vaughn and the surviving alien cadets to collapse in a heap of exhausted, panting limbs. They lay on the floor like washed-up sea creatures, gasping for air and groaning in agony. Maya stood untouched in the center of the room, wearing her extra 200 pounds of lead and tungsten. She rolled her neck, a loud, satisfying crack echoing off the polycarbonate glass. "Ah," she muttered, unbuckling the weighted vest and dropping it onto the steel deck. The metal slab struck the floor so hard it left a visible dent in the plating. We were just getting warmed up. 2 hours later, the Grand Council of the Interspecies Military Academy convened in an emergency executive session. Instructor Thrax stood at the center of the marble amphitheater, his blue skin pale and his bio-monocle trembling as he presented the telemetry logs to a panel of 12 high admirals.
"The registry was wrong,"
Thrax stammered, pointing a shaking finger at the holographic projection of Earth spinning above the chamber. The scout probe scanned a bird, a literal avian creature soaring in their upper cloud layer. They didn't scan the apex species on the surface. High Admiral Kalen, an ancient, heavily scarred Gorgon, leaned forward in his massive levitating throne. You put a cadet into a Class IV heavy re-entry simulation at nearly 3 gravities and 5 atmospheres. I attempted to enforce discipline, Admiral Thrax whispered. And what did the human do? Thrax swallowed hard. She asked if the machine was on power-saving mode, sir. Then she put on iron weights and performed physical exercise routines, while Cadet Vaughn suffered a structural carapace fracture. The chamber fell into a stunned, absolute silence. Kalen slowly pulled up the updated Xenological Bureau entry for Sol 3. He watched the high-definition combat scanner footage of Maya Cruz standing it effortlessly under conditions that would liquefy a standard galactic marine. Update the entry immediately, Kalen commanded, his voice trembling with a mixture of awe and profound terror. Reclassify Earth from Class 2 Soft Tech to Class Ix Prime Death World, and issue an immediate galactic advisory to all military branches. He looked down at Thrax. What is the advisory, Admiral? Thrax asked softly. Kalen closed the file. If you ever find yourself in physical combat with an Earthling, do not try to weigh them end down. You are merely giving them a workout. Down in the lower barracks, Maya sat on her standard-issue cot, opening a small care package her mother had sent from Colorado. Inside was a jar of homemade peanut butter and a dog-eared paperback novel. The door to her quarters slid open. Vaughn stood in the doorway, his arm wrapped in thick biofoam bandages, his chiton dull and battered. Maya looked up from her book. Hey, Vaughn, you okay? That gravity spike looked pretty rough on your joints. The 8-foot-tall chitinous war master shrank back slightly, his lower mandibles twitching in genuine terror. He gave a stiff, awkward bowing gesture, the Krathak sign of total submission to a superior apex predator. I came to apologize, Cadet Cruz, Vaughn clicked nervously, and to ask a tactical favor. Maya blinked. A favor? Vaughn held up a pair of heavy 50-pound kinetic restraint bands. Will you teach me how to lift the small iron blocks? I wish to survive your homeworld's baseline. Maya stared at him for a second, then broke into a wide, bright smile. Grab a pair of weights, Vaughn. Class starts now.